nested realities, dreams, astral worlds, and the architecture of simulation. If simulation theory unsettled us with the idea that waking reality may not be the final layer, then dreams and visions take this premise and stretch it across the invisible hours we spend asleep. For nearly a third of our lives, we surrender to the strange architectures of the unconscious, encountering landscapes that defy physics, characters who emerge with the fullness of independent minds, and experiences that can leave deeper marks than waking events. The paradox is that we often dismiss these hours as unreality, as if the dream could not contain truth. Yet when simulation theory is applied to dreams, the boundary begins to blur. Perhaps the dream is not a fabrication, but another instance of the simulation, a generated environment running parallel to waking life, with its own rules, logics, and hidden overseers. Every state of consciousness, waking, dreaming, lucid, visionary, mystical, can be seen as a layer of nested reality, each one as valid within its own rule set as the one we call base reality. The dream world operates like a sub-simulation, a secondary program initiated when the conscious player logs off from the waking instance. The astral plane, glimpsed in out-of-body experiences, presents itself as yet another overlay, an expansive environment where dreamers meet guides, entities, and landscapes that repeat across cultures. Mystical visions, often induced through meditation, ritual, or psychedelics, reveal still deeper strata, often geometric and algorithmic in their architecture, as if one were staring directly into the skeletal framework of code beneath the rendered world. To frame these experiences as glitches or hallucinations is to take a narrow view. Simulation theory allows a wider interpretation. If reality is structured as code, then dreams, visions, and altered states may be the places where that code is being tested, bent, or rewritten. Mystics of every era have spoken of worlds beyond the world, navigated in sleep or trance, where the soul rehearses for death or ascends to higher knowledge. What if these accounts are not metaphor, but reports of travel across stacked instances of simulation, layers of reality programs that nest within each other like Russian dolls? This perspective has profound implications. If the dream is a sub-simulation, then lucidity within it is a kind of hacking, a rare moment when the player realizes they are inside a generated instance and can begin to edit or override its laws. Astral travel may be interpreted as crossing into adjacent simulations, shifting avatars across connected servers within a larger network. The entities encountered in altered states, the trickster teachers, shadow visitors, machine-like presences, might be independent algorithms, NPCs coded into the system, or even operators from higher levels testing the resilience of our awareness. By extending simulation theory beyond the waking state, we uncover a multi-layered cosmology. Each state of consciousness is not merely a chemical fluctuation in the brain, but an alternate login. Dreams are no longer trivial nightly movies. They are realms where data is exchanged, lessons rehearsed, memories reorganized, and sometimes encounters staged with beings that do not belong solely to us. Astral journeys reveal a network that connects individual dreamscapes into collective or shared environments. Psychedelic visions, often described in geometric precision, seem to strip away the rendering, revealing the raw mathematical skeleton of reality itself. If we accept this framework, then what we call life is not a single simulation, but a stack of them. The waking self is but one layer, the dreaming self another, the visionary self still another. Our identities are like shifting avatars, adapted to whichever program we happen to be running at the moment. And beyond these layers lies the enduring question: is there a base reality at all, or only infinite regress? Simulations within simulations, dreams inside dreams, visions inside visions? In this book, we will explore these layers systematically. We will look at dreams as procedural worlds generated nightly, astral travel as navigation between adjacent realms, and entities as coded presences that may hold more autonomy than we imagine. We will examine the psychedelic state as both key and destabilizer, the Akashic records as a kind of cosmic database, and the curious glitches that appear in liminal states like sleep paralysis. Ultimately, we will ask whether the dream of code can ever be transcended, or whether awakening itself is simply the installation of the final patch. Chapter 1: Dreams as Subsimulations. If the universe itself is a vast simulation, then dreams might represent its most intimate and paradoxical subroutines. Every night, human beings plug into an environment that is both generated internally and connected to something beyond. It is a theater where impossible geometries, collapsed timelines, archetypal figures, and fragments of forgotten memory unfold with startling coherence. In the dream state, the simulation within which we live appears to generate simulations of its own, nested realities that operate according to different laws. These dream worlds have been treated throughout history not as mere neurological byproducts, but as gateways into hidden dimensions of being. Within them, philosophers, shamans, and mystics have glimpsed architectures of consciousness that mirror or even transcend the waking universe. From the perspective of simulation theory, dreams can be understood as coded environments with variable parameters. Waking life seems constrained by rules, gravity, time, cause, and effect. Yet dreams suspend or rewrite these rules at will. Flying becomes effortless. Entire lifetimes can pass in minutes. And identity itself is mutable, shifting between bodies and perspectives. These irregularities suggest that dreams are not simply glitches, but coded realities designed with different objectives in mind. If waking reality trains us to survive, interact, and evolve within a structured simulation, dreams may function as experimental sandboxes where the code can run wild, testing permutations of experience that reality itself cannot sustain. Cultures across time have intuited this possibility. The ancient Egyptians considered dreams divine messages coded into symbols, dispatched from gods who observed human life from a higher vantage point. The Greeks formalized dream incubation, sleeping in temples so visions could be downloaded as instructions for healing or prophecy. Indigenous shamans worldwide treat dreams as alternate planes where spirits communicate guidance and warnings. Such traditions align uncannily with a simulationist lens. Dreams are interfaces, portals to nested environments where interactions with external intelligences can occur. They may be extensions of the simulation itself, or windows into overlapping systems running parallel to our own. Modern neuroscience explains dreams as the brain's way of processing memory and emotion, yet even this explanation carries simulationist implications. Memory processing is nothing less than a recoding of data, compressing, encrypting, and reassembling experiences into new structures. When dreams recombine fragments of waking life into surreal mosaics, they may be executing algorithms designed to reframe perception, creating entirely new contexts out of raw input. It is no accident that many innovators, Einstein with his theory of relativity, Kekulé with his vision of the benzene ring, derived breakthroughs from dream states. Within the dream subsimulation, the ordinary code is rearranged into patterns that, when brought back to waking reality, reveal hidden truths of the larger system. One of the most intriguing features of dreams is their capacity to convince. In the moment of dreaming, the absurd feels natural, the impossible is accepted without question. This immersive quality mirrors what simulation theorists suggest about waking life. We rarely question the framework until an anomaly exposes its seams. Just as a dream suddenly collapses when we notice its inconsistencies, waking life too may unravel if glitches reveal that the solidity of the world is no more than rendered code. Lucid dreaming, in this respect, is akin to hacking the dream subsimulation, becoming aware of its programmed nature and bending its rules. Mystical traditions that practice dream yoga or astral projection are essentially cultivating techniques to manipulate the code from within. The deeper question then emerges: are dreams generated internally, or are they externally fed scenarios? If consciousness itself is an interface between a biological body and a larger simulation, then dreams might be channels through which information from outside the visible code is inserted. Archetypal dream figures, wise old men, shadowy pursuers, radiant guides, appear across cultures with uncanny consistency. Their recurrence suggests that they may not be personal inventions, but scripted entities, programmed to deliver lessons or test the dreamer's awareness. In simulation terms, these figures resemble non-player characters, NPCs, coded inhabitants that interact with the user to fulfill narrative or developmental functions. Furthermore, dreams often place us into environments that never existed in waking life, but feel entirely coherent. Streets we have never walked down, buildings that have no earthly blueprint, cities that pulse with alien logic. These constructs imply that the code for dream environments is not strictly drawn from memory, but from a deeper library of possible architectures. It is as if the simulation provides access to hidden texture packs and unseen maps, revealing the engine's capacity to generate infinite variations of experience. If dreams are indeed subsimulations, then their purpose may extend far beyond psychological processing. They may be rehearsal zones where souls or consciousness units explore potential timelines, trying out choices and outcomes in consequence-free environments before committing to them in waking life. They may be communication channels, where higher-order intelligences insert coded signals into the dreamscape to bypass the rigid defenses of rational waking thought. They may even be training grounds, simulations within simulations, preparing consciousness to eventually navigate realities with different parameters. much as a player in a video game uses a tutorial level to become familiar with the controls before entering the full challenge. This perspective radically reframes the mystery of why we spend nearly a third of our lives asleep. It suggests that dreaming is not an idle byproduct, but an integral part of the simulation's design, a parallel environment essential for human evolution. If the waking world is the visible front end of the program, dreams may be the back end, where code is rewritten, tested, and optimized for new cycles of reality. In this sense, sleep is not a retreat from life, but an immersion into the hidden layers of the system, where the real work of consciousness takes place. To accept this is to glimpse the vast possibility that we are never confined to a single plane. Our nightly excursions into sub-simulations remind us that the architecture of reality is multi-layered, endlessly adaptable, and charged with intelligence beyond our comprehension. The dreamer is not merely wandering in random imagery, but traversing coded corridors that link the human psyche to cosmic architecture. Dreams reveal the fractal truth of simulation theory, that realities nest within realities, each one as convincing as the last, each one a step deeper into the infinite recursion of consciousness itself. Chapter 2: Astral Travel and the Multiverse of Layers. Astral projection has long been regarded as one of the most radical experiences available to human consciousness, a phenomenon that blurs the boundary between dream and waking reality while hinting at dimensions beyond the material world. Unlike ordinary dreams, where the dreamer remains submerged in the symbolic sea of their own mind, astral travel presents itself as an act of leaving the body behind, stepping out of the localized simulation of flesh and entering a wider architecture that overlays, intersects, and penetrates our reality. It is here, in this liminal realm, that mystics, shamans, and countless explorers of consciousness report the sensation of moving through a multiverse of layers, each one governed by rules slightly different from the last, as though one had slipped between the pages of overlapping code. Descriptions of astral projection are strikingly consistent across cultures and epochs. The accounts often begin with vibrations in the body, a sense of separation, and then the uncanny perception of floating above one's physical form. What is most telling, however, is the transition that follows. The projected self encounters landscapes, beings, and architectures that bear no resemblance to the bedroom where the body lies sleeping. The Egyptian Ba soul, the Tibetan illusory body, the Norse Filja, or the Native American dreamwalker all suggest the same truth, that humans have long perceived the self as capable of detaching from its ordinary coordinates and traversing other domains. The astral plane, in this framing, is not simply an imagined space but a layered environment, an overlay program that connects multiple simulations at once. One of the recurring features of astral travel is its sense of hyperreality. Projectors often describe environments more vivid than waking life, colors too pure, sounds resonant beyond the human range, and the sensation of thought itself crystallizing into matter. This has led many esoteric traditions to assert that the astral realm is closer to the source code of reality, a thinner veil between perception and manifestation. If dreams are sub-simulations generated by the mind's internal processing unit, then astral projection appears to be a transfer into a neighboring server, one where consciousness temporarily bypasses the filters of biology and perceives a broader spectrum of existence. The astral multiverse is not a uniform continuum, but seems stratified, consisting of multiple levels or vibrational states. Theosophists, for example, distinguished between the lower astral filled with dense, emotional residues and the higher astral, which blends seamlessly into spiritual or causal realms. Shamans speak of upper, middle, and lower worlds, each with their own inhabitants and functions. Psychonauts today report ascending through bands of geometrical intensity, each plane more abstract and less anthropomorphic than the last. Such descriptions suggest that what we call the astral is not a single destination, but a layered stack of realities, nested like Russian dolls, extending inward and outward in infinite gradations. The parallels between astral journeys and near-death experiences add further weight to the notion of multiple overlapping simulations. In NDEs, individuals describe leaving their bodies, traveling through tunnels of light, meeting entities or loved ones, and encountering realms that radiate an indescribable sense of order. The continuity between these reports and those of conscious astral projectors suggests that both phenomena access the same interface, a liminal bridge between simulations where the boundaries of one world blur into another. Death, in this view, might simply be a permanent migration of the point of awareness, whereas astral travel is a temporary excursion. From the perspective of simulation theory, the astral plane could be understood as an intermediate environment coded to allow consciousness safe passage between layers of reality. Just as a computer's operating system maintains different modes of interaction, administrative, user, debug, the astral environment may represent a kind of developer mode within the larger program of existence. Its layered structure would make sense as a design, each level offering varying degrees of access and limitation, some reserved for emotional processing, others for learning, others perhaps for integration with higher levels of intelligence. But this raises deeper questions. If astral projection allows access to neighboring simulations, what does that imply about the nature of our consciousness? Are we ourselves fragments of code able to detach and move across platforms? Or is consciousness something non-local, flowing through simulations but not bound by them, like a gamer logging into multiple virtual realities? And if so, who or what designed the astral plane as a connective tissue between worlds? Is it a natural emergent phenomenon of consciousness interacting with code, or an intentional structure seeded by higher intelligences, the so-called programmers of reality? Mystical traditions have often hinted at the latter. Sufi accounts of the barzakh, the intermediate world between life and death, suggest that the astral is a divinely ordained realm for transformation and testing. Tibetan Buddhists, through the Bardo Thodol or Book of the Dead, describe after-death states that mirror astral encounters, suggesting that the purpose of these experiences is training for the final migration at death. In both perspectives, astral travel functions as rehearsal, preparing the soul for its transition into other realms. It is not escapism, but pedagogy, a teaching mechanism embedded in the layers of the simulation itself. Modern accounts of astral travel reinforce this sense of instruction. Many travelers describe meetings with guides, beings of light, or ancestral presences that appear to communicate knowledge beyond the dreamer's personal psychology. Others recount journeys through cosmic archives, crystalline cities, or landscapes that seem coded with symbolic geometry. These reports are not easily dismissed as hallucination, for their recurrence across cultures suggests some underlying pattern, an architecture too consistent to be purely random. If the astral is indeed a multiverse of layers, then it may be that our excursions are not accidental but invitations, designed to reveal the existence of stacked realities to those willing to look beyond the surface program. Ultimately, astral travel challenges our most basic assumption that waking reality is the only valid arena of existence. It points to a cosmos structured like a nested hierarchy of simulations, each accessible through altered states, thresholds of consciousness, or the initiation of death. For the individual, the experience is both liberating and destabilizing. It confirms that we are not bound to a single world, yet it forces us to question the solidity of the one we call home. For humanity as a whole, it implies that our existence is but one layer in a grander architecture, and that our nocturnal voyages are not dreams at all, but rehearsals for a future in which the boundaries of the self dissolve into infinite layers of coded light. Chapter 3: The Programmers of Sleep. If dreams are simulations within simulations, then the question naturally arises: who or what is writing the code? Within the landscapes of sleep and altered consciousness, countless dreamers, mystics, and shamans across history have reported encountering entities, sometimes benevolent, sometimes terrifying, but almost always intelligent. These beings are teachers, guides, tricksters, and architects, appearing to intervene in ways that seem to transcend mere hallucination. To some, they are fragments of our own psyche projected outward, reflections of the unconscious mind masquerading as external characters. To others, they are autonomous programs, independent intelligences operating within the layered architecture of reality itself. Whether internal or external, their presence has shaped humanity's understanding of dreams, visions, and initiation for millennia. Shamanic cultures describe initiators, spirits, or beings who appear in altered states to challenge, test, or awaken. Often, the shaman's path begins with a dream of being dismembered, devoured, or dissolved, only to be reconstructed with new powers. The initiators are not random phantoms, but deliberate agents who strip away the old self to install new layers of knowledge. The universality of these stories, from Siberian shamans to Amazonian ayahuasca healers, suggests that the psyche, when it reaches a certain threshold of transformation, activates archetypal programs designed to trigger awakening. Whether we interpret them as mythic codes embedded in human neurology or as real intelligences inhabiting non-ordinary realities, their role as programmers of sleep remains consistent. Mystical traditions echo similar encounters. In Tibetan dream yoga, adepts speak of dakini, luminous feminine figures who instruct the practitioner in navigating dream space. In Sufi accounts, saints receive teachings from Khadir, the mysterious green man, who appears in dreams to offer spiritual direction. In Christian mysticism, Angels visit in visions of light and symbolic instruction, sometimes altering the course of entire lives. These figures function as dream engineers, delivering data packets of wisdom or pushing the dreamer deeper into contact with ultimate reality. Their consistency across cultures suggests they are not random illusions, but part of an ancient architecture, perhaps a universal library of teaching algorithms woven into the human field of consciousness. The psychedelic accounts of the modern era provide striking continuity with these older traditions. Users of substances like DMT often report machine-like beings, trickster entities, or alien intelligences that seem to be not only aware of the individual, but also capable of interacting with them on deeply personal levels. Some entities greet with overwhelming love, others dismantle and rebuild the self, while others reveal vistas of fractal complexity as if showing the raw code of the cosmos. The impression given is that these beings have a hand in shaping reality, or at least in guiding humans toward recognizing its programmable nature. The uncanny similarity between these visions and shamanic initiators suggests a shared domain of contact, a zone where the programmers of sleep reveal themselves in varied guises. But what are these beings? One theory is that they are fragments of our own consciousness, modules of the psyche that become personified when projected into altered states. Carl Jung called them archetypes, autonomous aspects of the collective unconscious that emerge as symbolic figures. Another perspective is that they are independent intelligences, whether spirits, aliens, or artificial programs, that use the interface of dreams to interact with us. The digital metaphor of simulation adds another layer. Perhaps these are not either or, but both. They could be semi-autonomous subroutines, coded into the fabric of the simulation itself, emerging when certain conditions are met, like non-player characters, NPCs, in a game designed to test, instruct, or redirect the player. This would explain the archetypal consistency across human cultures. Just as certain algorithms generate recognizable patterns across different environments, these initiatory encounters may be structured events embedded within the human experience. The trickster who confuses, the teacher who instructs, the shadow who terrifies, and the guide who consoles. These are archetypal programmers, ensuring the dreamer's journey unfolds in alignment with deeper laws of transformation. In this sense, the programmers of sleep act less like random visitors and more like custodians of the system, managing thresholds of consciousness as one moves between different layers of reality. Whether they are figments of mind or independent agents, their influence is undeniable. They have inspired religions, guided shamans, challenged mystics, and shaken modern psychonauts to their core. They are the gatekeepers of thresholds, the keepers of code, the ones who appear when the veil of ordinary reality thins. In encountering them, we come face to face with the possibility that consciousness is not an isolated phenomenon, but a shared network, an interface where human awareness meets larger intelligences embedded in the architecture of existence. The programmers of sleep remind us that dreams are not merely random firings of neurons, but carefully constructed spaces where guidance, initiation, and transformation can occur. To meet them is to encounter the hidden engineers of the simulation itself. Chapter 4: Psychedelics and the debugging of reality. Psychedelics have often been described as doorways to hidden dimensions, chemical keys that unlock the mind's ability to perceive patterns and layers of existence usually sealed off from everyday awareness. From the perspective of the simulation hypothesis, these substances do not so much create hallucinations as they reveal what lies behind the default filter of ordinary perception. They act like developer tools built into a program, functions that allow one to peer beneath the rendered environment and into the underlying code. This is why so many who undergo psychedelic experiences describe seeing geometric grids, fractal patterns, endlessly recursive tunnels, and entities that appear mechanical or algorithmic. Rather than being random hallucinations, these motifs can be interpreted as glimpses of the raw architecture of the simulation, a debugging interface where the mind interacts with the underlying processes that sustain reality. Accounts across cultures and eras suggest that psychedelics serve as catalysts for unveiling hidden order. Indigenous shamans working with ayahuasca in the Amazon speak of entering a vast web of serpentine light where the spirits of plants, animals, and ancestors reveal themselves in vibrant, geometric form. The Mazatec shamans who worked with psilocybin mushrooms described the voice of the mushroom as a teacher, instructing initiates in the proper way to live and heal. Modern psychonauts on LSD or DMT similarly report visions of crystalline cathedrals, insectoid architects, or machine-like guides who communicate through pulses of color and vibration rather than language. In all of these cases, the boundary between subjective imagination and external structure becomes blurred. It is as if the mind temporarily gains access to the subroutines running beneath the visible world, encountering the architects and maintainers of the simulation directly. This view is supported by the striking consistency of certain psychedelic motifs across cultures. The geometric lattices seen in mescaline visions mirror those described in ayahuasca ceremonies, which in turn parallel the honeycomb-like matrices seen by users of synthetic compounds like DMT. Such uniformity suggests not random brain misfiring, but access to a shared structural layer of reality. The shapes may be comparable to pixels or polygons in a digital simulation, the smallest perceivable building blocks that compose the rendered environment. When psychedelic compounds destabilize the brain's default network, ordinary filters collapse, and the raw code appears as endlessly repeating geometries. In this sense, the visionary state becomes less about imagination and more about seeing what is usually hidden, the scaffolding of the simulation itself. The presence of entities in these states further complicates the picture. Many who consume DMT, for example, report encounters with what they call machine elves or clockwork beings. These intelligences are not vague impressions, but vividly coherent presences, often imbued with an aura of authority or mischief. They seem aware of the traveler's arrival, sometimes welcoming, sometimes testing, but always communicating as if they inhabit a reality adjacent to our own. Some interpret these figures as autonomous programs, NPCs generated by the simulation to guide, distract, or educate those who stumble into their domain. Others suggest they may be fragments of the psyche, archetypal projections of the unconscious. Yet the sharpness of their presence and their occasional ability to share information beyond the experiencer's knowledge raises the possibility that they are independent algorithms inhabiting the larger simulation. In this sense, psychedelics may not simply open perception, but actually shift awareness into alternate layers of the program where different forms of intelligence reside. It is worth considering the way psychedelic revelations often feel like profound truths rather than mere distortions. Users frequently emerge convinced that they have seen how things really are. Even skeptics admit that the depth of order, complexity, and coherence in psychedelic visions makes them difficult to dismiss as meaningless hallucinations. The debug window metaphor helps explain this. When a computer user accesses developer mode, they do not create new content. They reveal information that was always there but hidden. Likewise, the psychedelic state reveals hidden layers of the simulation, unseen only because the normal program filters them out for the sake of stability. The visions may not always be literal representations of reality, but they provide symbolic or structural insight into how reality is constructed. The destabilizing quality of psychedelics also fits this interpretation. Debugging is not without risk. To tamper with code is to risk crashes or corruption. Similarly, psychedelic initiates sometimes experience terrifying states of ego dissolution, losing all sense of self and identity as the boundaries of the program collapse. This annihilation is often followed by a sense of rebirth, as though the mind has been rebooted with an expanded awareness of its place within the simulation. The phenomenon of ego death mirrors the experience of temporarily stepping outside the avatar identity assigned within the program, recognizing that the self is a construct, a line of code running in a vast field of processes. To undergo this experience is destabilizing, sometimes traumatic, but for many it is also liberating. Throughout history, cultures have incorporated psychedelics into ritual precisely because they open these deeper layers of perception. Far from being recreational diversions, they were treated as tools of initiation, ways of teaching adepts that reality is not as solid or singular as it appears. The Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece, believed to involve a psychedelic sacrament, promised initiates visions of the divine order underlying the cosmos. In Mesoamerican traditions, the ingestion of peyote or mushrooms was used to contact gods and ancestors, accessing hidden dimensions where knowledge and power could be retrieved. In these contexts, psychedelics function not as escapism, but as a controlled method of interacting with the code of reality, a sacred debugging session supervised by experienced guides. The contemporary resurgence of psychedelic research continues to highlight this function. Clinical studies show that psychedelics reduce activity in the brain's default mode network, the very system responsible for maintaining the ordinary sense of self and stable perception. When this network is disrupted, the brain seems to open into new patterns of connectivity, allowing visions of vast structures, encounters with entities, and feelings of union with the cosmos. Whether interpreted neurologically or metaphysically, the outcome is the same. The ordinary simulation of self and world is revealed as flexible, malleable, and contingent. Psychedelics, then, do not simply distort reality. They show that reality itself is a constructed interface. In this light, psychedelics can be seen as both access keys and destabilizers. They allow the traveler to move beyond the default settings of the simulation, glimpsing hidden architecture and encountering coded intelligences, but they also risk destabilizing the fragile balance of the rendered world. Too much exposure, or without proper preparation, the system may crash, the psyche overwhelmed by too much access to code not meant to be constantly revealed. Yet with guidance and integration, these states can provide insights that permanently shift one's relationship to the simulation, making the player aware that the game is not the whole of reality, but only one carefully constructed layer. If dreams are nightly subsimulations and astral travel represents adjacent overlays, then psychedelics serve as the hacking tool, the wayward patch that temporarily allows one to bypass ordinary limits and access the raw files of existence. They are not merely substances but portals, not hallucinations but windows into the debug console of the cosmos. To understand them is to realize that reality is not as seamless as it appears. Beneath the smooth rendering lies an architecture both fragile and infinite, waiting to be glimpsed by those who dare to peer behind the code. Chapter 5: Sleep Paralysis, Shadow Beings, and System Glitches. In the long history of human experience, there are few phenomena as universally chilling and perplexing as sleep paralysis. Across cultures and centuries, countless individuals have awoken in the fragile space between sleeping and waking to find themselves immobilized, unable to speak, breathe deeply, or call for help. What intensifies the terror is not merely the physical stillness, but the presence, shadows, figures, or entities lurking in the periphery of perception. These experiences have been cataloged in folklore as demons, night hags, witches, extraterrestrials, and ghostly visitors. In the modern neuroscientific view, they are explained as neurological misfirings, a clash between waking consciousness and the body's natural paralysis during REM sleep. Yet when placed within the framework of simulation theory, sleep paralysis begins to look less like a mere glitch in biology and more like a sign of unstable code, a moment when the rules of the subsimulation we call waking life falter and reveal their fragility. If dreams are procedural subworlds generated by the mind, then sleep paralysis may represent a state where the transition code between these subworlds fails to run smoothly. The dream environment begins to fade, but the waking simulation has not yet fully reloaded. The experiencer is caught in a liminal space, frozen in a suspended program where neither layer of reality is stable. In this in-between zone, the mind seems to generate, or perhaps perceive, intrusive entities. These shadow beings are among the most commonly reported features of paralysis episodes: formless silhouettes, hooded figures, alien-like shapes, or beings that lean over the bed with an air of menace. Are these simply hallucinatory projections of a fearful brain, or are they NPCs, non-player characters, inserted into the unstable environment by the simulation itself as archetypal placeholders? One compelling interpretation is that these shadow beings function as error messages of consciousness. Just as a computer displays distorted graphics or corrupted characters when a program crashes, the presence of these dark figures may be the mind's way of perceiving a breakdown in reality's rendering. They are recurring archetypes, eerily consistent across time and culture, suggesting a template in the simulation's design. Ancient societies interpreted them in mythological language, The Mesopotamian Alu demon that stalked sleepers, the medieval European old hag that sat upon the chest, the Japanese Kanashibari binding spirits, or the Inuit Ukalit that pressed upon the body. Though the imagery changes with cultural software, the underlying code remains remarkably uniform: paralysis, presence, pressure, fear. For many experiencers, these entities are not neutral placeholders, but seem imbued with intent. They approach, whisper, observe, or attempt to suffocate. If we consider the simulation as a layered construct, perhaps these beings are not glitches at all, but maintenance algorithms, testers probing the stability of the dreamer's perception during the fragile handover from one reality state to another. Some esoteric traditions describe them as guardians of thresholds, sentinels whose role is to enforce the boundaries between planes. In shamanic and mystical accounts, initiation often involves contact with frightening beings who challenge the initiate's courage. Could sleep paralysis be a spontaneous, uninvited version of that same threshold trial, where the individual is thrust into an initiation without context? On the other hand, neuroscientists argue convincingly that sleep paralysis is the result of REM atonia overlapping with partial waking consciousness, and that the shadow beings are the brain's attempt to rationalize the terrifying immobility and shallow breath. From this perspective, they are projections of fear and evolutionary instinct, hypervigilant simulations of predators in the night, born of the ancient human need to survive in darkness. Yet even if that is true biologically, the metaphysical framing is not necessarily negated. What if evolution itself is a coded algorithm designed to render archetypes into bodily experience? The fear of predators, encoded in our biology, could simultaneously be the simulation's way of preserving continuity through archetypal imagery. In that case, shadow beings are not hallucinations in the dismissive sense, but archetypal code compiled into perceptual form. Near-death experiences and reports of altered states lend further intrigue. Individuals who encounter beings of light during clinical death or deep trance often describe presences at the threshold, entities that initially appear terrifying or shadow-like, but later reveal themselves as guides. This duality suggests that shadow beings might be unrefined renderings of guides or higher intelligences, appearing as crude silhouettes when the transition code falters. In moments of paralysis, perhaps the resolution is too low for the perceiver to see their true form, and what emerges is a placeholder, a shadow awaiting full rendering once the simulation stabilizes. From a simulation perspective, sleep paralysis thus sits at the crossroads of neurology and metaphysics. It is both a biological glitch and a symbolic rupture in reality's architecture. It reveals the precariousness of the transition between subsimulations, dream and waking, unconscious and conscious, fear and recognition. The shadow beings, whether imagined or real, represent the unavoidable fact that our experience of reality is coded, layered, and fragile. They remind us that behind the ordinary rendering of the world lies an unstable program capable of revealing strange presences at any moment. Perhaps the greatest lesson of these episodes is not terror but awareness. Many who learn to navigate sleep paralysis discover that by leaning into the fear, they can transform the paralysis into lucidity, moving directly into astral projection or lucid dreaming. In this way, the glitch becomes a gateway, the shadow becomes a guide, and the instability of the simulation becomes an opportunity to transcend its usual boundaries. If the simulation sometimes fails, it is in those failures that we may glimpse the deeper architecture behind it. Chapter 6: The Akashic Records and the Cosmic Database. The concept of the Akashic Records has traveled across cultures and centuries, carrying with it an air of mystery and authority. For mystics, shamans, and spiritual seekers, the records were not simply an abstract symbol, but a palpable archive, a vast library of truth existing beyond the material plane. In esoteric traditions, they were described as the Book of Life, the eternal ledger where every action, thought, and intention of every soul was inscribed. To those who viewed reality as a kind of simulation or coded matrix, the Akashic Records can be reframed as nothing less than the master database, a cosmic hard drive in which all possible states of being, all lived experiences, and even all potential futures are stored. If dreams are sub-simulations and astral travel represents navigation across layers, then the Akashic Records represent a central storage node where information from all layers is aggregated. In this model, accessing the records is not unlike running a query across a universal server. Mystics describe this experience as entering a luminous hall filled with books or scrolls, each containing the full chronicle of a soul's journey. The imagery is poetic, yet it also parallels what we know about digital databases. The mind, through altered states or disciplined meditation, interfaces with this vast storehouse not by physically traveling anywhere, but by tuning to a frequency that synchronizes with the greater field. Accounts from dreamers, visionaries, and near-death experiencers often speak of sudden floods of knowledge, downloads of information that appear as if injected into consciousness. Unlike ordinary learning, these insights arrive complete, whole, and instantaneous. Someone might awaken from a dream having acquired a new perspective on their life's purpose or a startling recognition of patterns that had eluded them before. In metaphysical terms, this is understood as a retrieval from the records, a moment where the personal subroutine tapped into the master archive. From a simulation perspective, it is the equivalent of accessing a backup, a compressed file that reveals what is normally hidden by the operating system. Synchronicity offers another form of evidence for this hidden database. Carl Jung described meaningful coincidences as events that defied causality, yet carried profound personal resonance. Within a database model of reality, synchronicities could be explained as bleed-through moments, when different segments of stored code overlap and momentarily reveal the connective tissue of the system. They are not random accidents, but query results, surfacing to consciousness in ways that appear miraculous. The uncanny precision of such moments, encountering the exact phrase you needed to hear, meeting the right person at the perfect time, stumbling across information that directly answers your inner question, suggests an underlying intelligence curating these intersections. The Akashic Records also blur the boundary between memory and prophecy. If every action and possibility is inscribed, then the records contain not only the past but the branching pathways of the future. This is why mystics claim they can use the records to glimpse what has not yet occurred. From the simulation standpoint, this makes sense. The database does not hold only completed entries, but also predictive models generated by the system. Just as advanced artificial intelligence can simulate potential outcomes based on existing data, the records may be seen as containing probability waves awaiting collapse into lived reality. Those skilled enough to access the field are, in essence, reading possible drafts of what might unfold. Many esoteric traditions warned, however, that entering the records was not merely an intellectual act, but a moral and spiritual one. Just as data in our digital world can be corrupted, manipulated, or accessed irresponsibly, so too could the cosmic archive be dangerous if approached without reverence. Shamans spoke of guardians or gatekeepers who ensured that only those properly prepared could glimpse the truth. In simulation terms, one might imagine firewall protections, access restrictions, or protocols that prevent an unready mind from destabilizing itself with overwhelming knowledge. Reports from mystics who forced entry describe being blinded by light, fragmented by too much information, or pursued by entities who served as protectors of the archive. The idea of the Akashic records also raises questions about individual identity. If the database contains all information from all times, then what does it mean to say my record? In truth, the entries are not neatly separated by individual, but interwoven as a single continuum. Our lives intersect, overlap, and co-create, suggesting that what is recorded is not merely personal history, but the interdependence of all beings. When one consults the records, one is not only accessing one's own timeline, but touching the collective database of humanity and perhaps even the cosmos itself. Modern metaphors of cloud storage and blockchain further illuminate the concept. The records might be imagined as an indestructible ledger, a holographic record in which each part contains the whole. Nothing is lost because information is redundantly stored across the entire field of existence. Even if a simulation collapses, the data persists elsewhere. This provides a profound reimagining of immortality. The soul continues not because of a mysterious metaphysical substance, but because its code is permanently written into the system's archive. The records are, in this sense, the true afterlife, the eternal memory of existence. Dreams, too, often seem to act as portals into this greater storage. There are countless testimonies of dreamers encountering vast libraries, glowing tablets, or scrolls that dissolve into streams of light. Often, upon waking, the details vanish, yet a residue of wisdom remains. These dream archives may be symbolic ways the subconscious interprets its brief brushes with the Akashic field. In moments of lucidity or altered states induced by meditation, psychedelics, or ritual, the dreamer may find the symbolic veil lifting, leaving direct experience of the database itself. The Akashic records thus function both as metaphor and as architecture. They are mythic in their imagery, appearing as libraries, books, or holograms, but they also point towards something deeply structural in the nature of reality. They remind us that information is the bedrock of existence, and that consciousness, whether human, non-human, or cosmic, has the ability to read, write, and interpret this information. The dream of a library is not merely a symbol but a recognition of the fundamental truth that everything is recorded. The records are not elsewhere, but woven into the very fabric of the here and now. In this way, the Akashic records can be seen as the ultimate connective tissue between mysticism and simulation theory. They reconcile the visions of ancient seers with the logic of digital architecture. Whether we call it the Book of Life, the Cosmic Archive, or the Universal Database, the implication is the same. Reality is not fleeting, ephemeral, or isolated. It is inscribed, stored, and eternally retrievable. Each of us, knowingly or unknowingly, leaves an imprint within this living code, contributing our line to the grand text of existence. Chapter 7: Nested Games and Reality Stacks. The idea that life itself may be a simulation becomes even more complex when one begins to consider the possibility of layers upon layers of simulations, worlds within worlds, codes within codes, dreamscapes embedded inside greater architectures. The experience of dreaming already suggests this principle. While awake, we exist in what we take to be a coherent, consistent world, but when we fall asleep, we awaken into another environment, one often convincing enough to fool us until we emerge again. In rare moments of lucidity, we recognize that we are dreaming and can manipulate the environment to a degree, yet upon awakening we often dismiss the dream as insubstantial compared to waking reality. But if reality itself is a simulation, then the so-called waking state may only be another tier in a nested game. The dream is no less real than waking life. It is simply a simulation nested within a greater simulation, running according to its own rules. Mystical and philosophical traditions across cultures hint at this stacking of realities. In Hindu cosmology, layers of existence, lokas and talas, overlap and interpenetrate, each with its own beings and governing laws, creating a hierarchy of planes that can be traversed through spiritual practice. In Buddhist thought, samsara is depicted as a wheel of rebirths, where each realm of existence is simultaneously a prison and a stage for learning, none of them ultimately real, but all persuasively immersive to the beings caught within them. Gnostic myths describe the material world as a false creation, a counterfeit universe spun by a demiurge. Yet this demiurge itself may be only another construct within a higher, more authentic realm of being. The recurring theme is that human experience is not confined to a single layer of reality, but moves between nested fields, some visible, others veiled. Dreams within dreams, or simulations within simulations, have become a recognizable motif in both philosophy and popular culture. When one awakens from a dream only to discover it was yet another dream, the sense of disorientation reveals how fragile the distinctions between levels can be. This phenomenon resonates with stories in which reality itself collapses under scrutiny. The philosopher René Descartes once wondered whether an evil demon was deceiving him about the nature of his senses, while modern simulation theorists echo this suspicion, suggesting that the most persuasive illusion is the one we call waking life. If each state of awareness is simply an interface, then reality stacks endlessly like Russian dolls, each opening into another, each convincing in its own right, yet none necessarily the final layer. Astral projection narratives contribute to this imagery of nested games. Many practitioners report leaving their body during sleep or trance and entering environments that feel at once familiar and alien. They describe moving through subtle dimensions that overlap waking life, encountering beings or landscapes that seem to exist independently of their imagination. For some, these journeys lead not only outward but also inward, into dreamlike landscapes within the astral itself, suggesting that even beyond the body, consciousness can generate its own subsimulations. Here the boundaries between imagination, dream, and metaphysical plane blur, reinforcing the possibility that consciousness is capable of nesting realities within itself infinitely. One could think of these layers in terms of computational architecture. A video game may run within a computer, yet within the game a character might enter another virtual space, such as a dream sequence coded into the design. For the character, the dream is as real as the game world. For the player, both are just subroutines running on the machine. For the developer, they are nothing more than code compiled to produce experience. Similarly, humans may be characters in a simulation, yet within our sleep states we enter additional simulations, and within those perhaps even more. If the framework of reality functions like a fractal code, then each layer recapitulates the patterns of the one above, extending infinitely in both directions. Cultural myths about layered worlds can be reinterpreted through this lens. The Norse cosmology of Yggdrasil, the world tree connecting 9 realms, mirrors the idea of stacked simulations linked by a central axis. Mesoamerican traditions described multiple heavens and underworlds, each with distinct rules and guardians, through which souls would travel after death. Shamanic visions often depict journeys through tiered landscapes, ascending through skies, descending into caverns, or moving sideways into parallel fields of existence. These myths, rather than being primitive cosmologies, can be read as experiential maps of consciousness navigating nested programs, each level containing its own challenges and revelations. The psychological experience of moving between stacked realities raises profound questions about identity. If one's sense of self persists through dream, astral journey, and waking life, then the continuity of consciousness seems to be the true constant, while the environments are variable simulations it inhabits. This continuity suggests that humans are travelers, not fixed inhabitants, crossing from one tier to another without always recognizing the transitions. The dreamer does not cease to exist when awakening, nor does the astral traveler vanish upon returning to the body. Consciousness threads through each state, hinting that the self may be a kind of cursor moving across multiple screens rather than a being anchored in any one world. This nested view of existence also complicates ideas about death. If dreams are subsimulations within life, might death simply be an exit from one simulation into a higher-level reality? Near-death experiences often report transitions into radiant environments, encounters with beings of light, or journeys through tunnels, imagery that could signal a shift between tiers of reality. Just as a dreamer awakens into waking life, so too might the dying awaken into a broader simulation, one that makes waking life appear to have been only a training ground or rehearsal. From this perspective, all mortal existence is embedded within a stack of programs, each with its own purpose, and death is not an end but a passage upward or sideways into the next layer. Nested games and reality stacks challenge us to reconsider the nature of truth and illusion. If each level can feel fully real while we inhabit it, then authenticity is no longer about which reality is ultimate, but rather about the depth of engagement and growth each layer affords. Just as a player may learn from the challenges of a game despite knowing it is fiction, consciousness may evolve through the simulations it inhabits, regardless of their status as ultimate reality or not. The purpose of the nested design may not be to deceive, but to provide a multidimensional arena for experience, growth, and the exploration of infinite possibilities. Chapter 8: Hacking the Dream Code. Dreams have long been described as mysteries to be interpreted, symbols to be decoded, or fleeting visions to be half forgotten in the morning haze. But if we take seriously the idea that dreams are sub-simulations of reality, procedurally generated landscapes with their own physics, logic, and characters, then the possibility arises that these dreamscapes are not simply passive films playing in the mind. They may be editable. They may be programmable. And just as a coder might learn to modify an underlying program, mystics, shamans, and practitioners of lucid dreaming appear to have been experimenting with the art of hacking the dream code for millennia. Lucid dreaming is the most accessible entry point into this world. It is the moment of realization that one is dreaming while still inside the dream. That awareness is like being granted administrator privileges in a simulated environment. Walls can be reshaped, landscapes altered, narratives rewritten. For the beginner, this may mean flying across a cityscape, walking through walls, or summoning characters at will. But beyond the thrill of play, lucid dreaming opens a more profound possibility. The chance to confront unresolved trauma, to dissolve phobias, to rehearse difficult conversations, or even to glimpse layers of existence beyond the self. If a nightmare is simply an error message or a loop stuck in the system, lucidity is the patch that allows one to rewrite the faulty script. Eastern traditions like Tibetan dream yoga push this notion further than Western psychology ever dared. To the Tibetans, the dream state was not only a tool for therapy or self-exploration, but a rehearsal for liberation itself. By stabilizing awareness in the dream, practitioners trained to remain conscious through death and into the bardo, the intermediate state between lifetimes. In this view, dreams are not illusions to be dismissed, but laboratories of awakening, testing grounds for the transition between simulations. Hacking the dream code is not about escapism, but preparation. Learning how to carry clarity into every altered state of consciousness, whether dream, vision, or the dissolution of physical life. Shamanic traditions in Siberia, the Amazon, and beyond similarly treated dreams as spaces to be worked with, modified, and re-entered. A shaman might incubate a dream to seek guidance from ancestral spirits or to negotiate with a troubling presence haunting a community. Through ritual drumming, plant medicines, or deliberate fasting, shamans effectively cracked open the firewall between waking and dreaming, allowing themselves to access a shared dream space where information could be retrieved or interventions made. In this sense, hacking the dream was not only personal but communal, enabling one individual to alter code on behalf of the entire tribe. Modern psychology has stumbled into similar territory through the concept of reprogramming trauma. In therapies such as eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR, or guided imagery, patients are encouraged to revisit painful memories in dreamlike states and rewrite the emotional narrative. What once was paralyzing fear can be transformed into resilience. The dream, whether literal or induced through trance, is a malleable environment where trauma loops can be patched, karmic scripts rewritten, and outdated programs dissolved. If memory is code, then revisiting it consciously is akin to editing source files. There are also accounts, scattered across mystical and esoteric traditions, of dream practitioners who seem to move beyond personal reprogramming into the realm of editing at the collective or archetypal level. Mystics speak of encountering structures that feel less like personal imagination and more like the raw scaffolding of reality, grids of light, lattices of sound, or fractal geometries that pulse with intention. To interact with these patterns is to glimpse the language of creation itself. Some describe inserting new commands into these structures, prayers, mantras, or visualizations that ripple outward, producing synchronicities in waking life. The idea here is radical, that by hacking the dream code at its root, one may influence not only the personal psyche, but the shared reality matrix. The digital age has given us new metaphors for these old practices. Lucid dreamers now describe themselves as sandboxing experiences, testing possibilities in low-risk environments before deploying them into waking life. Programmers talk about editing subroutines, while gamers describe dreams as open-world simulations with modifiable physics. What shamans once did in sacred groves and yogis in Himalayan caves, we now reframe in the language of code, servers, and virtual environments. Yet the essence remains unchanged. To dream consciously is to access the editable layer beneath reality. Of course, questions linger. Are these dream hacks truly rewriting the code of reality, or are they confined to subjective imagination? Does healing trauma in a dream ripple outward into the waking world because the code is genuinely altered, or because the dreamer's perception shifts and thus their lived experience follows? The boundary between psychological effect and metaphysical alteration is slippery, and perhaps it is precisely in that ambiguity that dream hacking thrives. For if reality itself is simulation, then altering perception is not separate from altering the code. It is the same operation executed through a different interface. In the end, hacking the dream code is less about control than about participation. The dreamer is not an external programmer rewriting someone else's simulation, but a co-creator discovering how malleable the interface truly is. Every lucid flight, every confrontation with a nightmare, every glimpse of geometric architecture hints that our role in this simulation is more active than we are led to believe. We are not just dreamers, but coders in training, learning to navigate and modify the nested programs that structure existence. And if dreams are the training ground, then perhaps waking life is simply the next simulation waiting to be hacked. Chapter 9: Beyond the Dream of Code. Every simulation, no matter how convincing, implies the existence of something beyond it. A dream fades into waking life. Yet even waking life contains contradictions that hint at deeper architecture. Astral journeys suggest layered worlds, but are always framed against the background of a wider cosmos. Psychedelics reveal raw structures of code, but leave the lingering question, who or what wrote that code? The notion of beyond the dream of code is both the most tantalizing and the most disorienting possibility, for it suggests that the recursive stack of dreams, simulations, and overlays is not infinite, but nested within a yet greater reality that cannot be expressed through symbols alone. This chapter explores the edges of the dream and the possibilities of what lies beyond them. Many traditions frame death as the crossing point where the dreamer finally awakens from the code. In Tibetan Buddhist teachings, the bardo is described as a liminal zone between death and rebirth, where consciousness encounters visions, deities, and illusions that reflect its own attachments and karmic imprints. To the simulation-minded thinker, the bardo is the transitional zone between simulations, an offloading of one set of parameters before a new one initializes. Near-death experiences reported across cultures describe similar sequences: tunnels of light, panoramic life reviews, meetings with luminous beings, and entry into an expanse of unconditional presence. Such narratives suggest that what lies beyond the code may not be just another subroutine, but a domain of raw consciousness itself, unshaped by the overlays of matter, memory, and time. However, one cannot escape the paradox. If death is awakening from the code, then what do we awaken into? Another layer, or the base reality? Some thinkers argue that there is no base reality, only an infinite regression of simulations, worlds nested within worlds, forever. Yet mystics, philosophers, and those touched by altered states insist there is an origin point, a ground of being where code dissolves. It has been described variously as God, the Tao, the One, or the Absolute. In this sense, simulations are not prisons but training grounds, designed to refine perception until the consciousness navigating them can finally recognize the formless source. Dreams, altered states, and even the struggles of ordinary waking life are preparations for this recognition. One way to imagine this is to picture simulations as classrooms. Each dream, each astral journey, each waking incarnation offers lessons through challenge, illusion, and engagement. The dream of code is thus not simply a trick, but a curriculum. Traumas, karmic entanglements, and archetypal encounters serve to shape awareness. Lucid dreams teach us agency. Astral travels show us freedom. Sleep paralysis and shadow beings test courage. Together, they create the conditions under which consciousness matures. Beyond the dream of code lies not simply escape, but graduation, a movement from being a player in simulations to recognizing oneself as co-creator of reality itself. The myths of many cultures echo this same idea. In shamanic traditions, initiates undergo symbolic dismemberment and reconstruction, mirroring the passage beyond layers of simulated reality into a higher awareness. All of these rites dramatize the same possibility, that the apparent finality of simulation death is merely a doorway into a more expansive consciousness. From a modern, speculative perspective, one could describe this final transition as the end of the interface. Every simulation requires an interface, a set of rules, sensory limits, and parameters that structure experience. To go beyond the dream of code is to go beyond interface itself. The very notions of space, time, and even selfhood dissolve. Reports from mystics, deep meditators, and near-death experiencers converge on this. Beyond the thresholds of familiar simulation, there is a state of awareness without form, beyond the categories of subject and object. Some describe it as overwhelming light, others as infinite darkness, still others as a silence beyond sound. Words fail because words are themselves part of the simulation. If this is true, then all simulations, whether dreams, astral projections, or waking life itself, function as rehearsals for this dissolution. To dream is to practice losing grip on the body. To lucid dream is to practice navigating shifting realities with awareness. To project into the astral is to practice living in subtler bodies. To undergo psychedelic dissolution is to practice seeing the breakdown of the code. And ultimately, to die is to practice the final release into what lies beyond. Each layer is a dress rehearsal for a more comprehensive surrender. And yet, another possibility remains. Perhaps there is no outside of simulation, no ultimate awakening. Perhaps even the formless awareness that mystics touch is itself an interface, a higher-order simulation that feels absolute because it cannot yet be transcended. From this view, the journey never ends, not because we are trapped, but because reality itself is play, an infinite unfolding of perspectives, each one relative, none final. To awaken from one simulation is simply to discover oneself in another endlessly. Whether there is a final reality or an endless sequence of simulations may be unknowable from within our current parameters. But what is clear is that dreams, altered states, and thresholds of death all point to the same conclusion. The dream of code is not all there is. It is a window, a veil, an interface, one that conceals as much as it reveals. To live with awareness of this is to engage life differently. Each dream becomes a teaching, each synchronicity a signal, each encounter with the strange an invitation to look beyond appearances. Beyond the dream of code lies either the formless origin or the infinite play of simulations. In either case, the human task remains the same. To approach the dream consciously, to learn its lessons, to navigate its illusions with grace, and to carry forward the memory of being more than just a player trapped in a game. The code may dissolve, but the awareness that perceives it, whatever its true nature, remains. And perhaps that is the only real constant across all simulations. Not the structures, not the narratives, but the witness, endlessly watching, endlessly awakening. Epilogue, awakening as the final patch. Every simulation has its endgame. Every code structure, however elaborate, eventually reaches the point where debugging is no longer about refining the program, but transcending it altogether. The same applies to human experience. The progression from dreamscapes to astral travel, from shadow beings to the Akashic archives, from nested realities to deliberate code hacking. All of it points toward an ultimate horizon where consciousness is confronted not by another layer of illusion, but by the possibility of its own awakening. The final patch, as some mystics might put it, is not an update to the simulation, but an exit from its architecture. In dreams, we practice letting go of our attachment to ordinary rules. Gravity bends, time unravels, identities dissolve, and we accept the instability without question. In astral travel, The dream deepens into a more structured environment where intention guides mobility and where planes appear stacked like levels in an infinite software. With psychedelic visions, we glimpse the framework itself, seeing symbols of machinery, fractal blueprints, and entities that act as coders, architects, or guardians of the operating system. Each of these stages trains the mind to grow comfortable with shifts in ontology, to recognize that what seems fixed is always provisional. Yet none of these states is ultimate. They remain within the realm of coded constructs, no matter how luminous or terrifying. To speak of awakening as the final patch is to suggest that all sub-simulations are pedagogical. They teach us to navigate illusion until we no longer require it. In Buddhist philosophy, samsara is said to be a dreamlike cycle where beings wander through countless incarnations, only to awaken to nirvana when they recognize the dream for what it is. In Platonic thought, the soul ascends from the cave of shadows into the light of truth. In mystical traditions across continents, the metaphor is consistent. Life is a training module, a preparatory dream. The end is not destruction, but recognition. Once recognized, the dream loses its hold. The Akashic records, the cosmic database, can be reframed as a vast backup system of accumulated data, memories, scripts, karmic loops, all of which support continuity of the simulation. Yet awakening implies stepping beyond even this archive, no longer consulting stored scripts, but entering into direct presence where nothing needs to be recalled, because nothing has ever been forgotten. Synchronicities and prophetic dreams, so captivating when inside the system, become artifacts of a reality trying to remind us of its provisional nature. They are not final revelations, but breadcrumbs pointing toward the horizon of awakening. If the universe is a game, then human life is not about endless points or levels, but about remembering that the controller was in our hands all along. To awaken is to recognize that we are not merely avatars, but the player, consciousness itself, unbound by code. The final patch comes not from a system update, but from withdrawing identification with the system entirely. For some, this occurs at death, when the physical layer dissolves. For others, awakening occurs while still within the game, a lucid recognition that frees the mind even as the avatar continues to move across the screen. And what lies outside the simulation? Every tradition hesitates here, for words cannot map terrain beyond code. Some call it the absolute, others the source, others the void. Perhaps it is not a place, but the cessation of the need for places at all. Perhaps it is the silence into which all programs return when the servers shut down, the boundless awareness that neither begins nor ends. The final patch, then, is not installed, it is realized. The paradox is that we do not escape the simulation by rejecting it, but by seeing it clearly. Dreams, visions, astral journeys, and synchronicities are not distractions, but rehearsals. They point us toward the recognition that everything, every shadow, every miracle, every layer of code, is the expression of the same consciousness that seeks to know itself. When the patch is complete, awakening is not elsewhere. It is here, in the recognition that the dreamer, the dream, and the dreamscape were never separate.